Hello everyone, and welcome to my Baldur's Gate 3 Honor Mode Achievement Walkthrough. I'm your host, Colors Fade. In this video, I'll talk about my party composition, strategies, and then we'll cover all the major encounters. You can find timestamps in the description below. A key thing I want to stress before I get started is that there are no do-overs in Honor Mode. It's one save file. As such, I could only afford to approach each of these encounters in the way that best suited my specific party. That means for some bosses, I either defeated them or made their encounters easier using speech checks. Your party composition may not allow for the same choices I had, so you may have to battle enemies that I did not. For now, let's get started with a brief overview of my party and classes. I played the game as a Githyanki warlock. I chose Githyanki because I wanted the extra Misty Step ability in case I needed to get out of trouble. If an encounter is going badly in Honor Mode, it's perfectly fine to withdraw, go back to camp, res your dead party members, and try again. As for my main character, I chose the Great Old One warlock for the Mortal Reminder ability, which causes fear on a critical hit. Fear is a great way to crowd control because it roots enemies in place, and that turned out to be a pretty big deal during one of the early boss fights. With my main character, I took her all the way to level 5 as a warlock with Pact of the Tome specialization for spells, and then Draconic Bloodline Lightning Sorcerer the rest of the way. At level 12, I respect her to full Draconic Bloodline Lightning Sorcerer with Spell Sniper, so I could hang on to the Eldritch Blast. Haste, Lightning, Hold Person, and Globe of Invulnerability all played key roles in my arsenal. For companions, I built Shadowheart, Asterion, and Gale all as level 10 College of Lore bards with level 2 life cleric classes, and then swapped them in and out of the party as necessary for story purposes. The cleric levels gave them access to Preserve Life, which is a really nice AoE heal to have toward the endgame, and maybe more importantly, the cleric levels also gave them access to Sanctuary. Enemies in Baldur's Gate 3 will target spellcasters and try to break their concentration, but that tactic is made much harder if the spellcaster can put up Sanctuary to protect themselves. Often, my bard would haste a party member or cast an AoE crowd control spell, then immediately cast Sanctuary on themselves as a bonus action and sneak to a good hiding spot. This prevented enemies from breaking their concentration and losing the spell. Later on, toward the end of the game, I used Gale exclusively in this role because I needed him to blow up the Netherbrain. The next most important role was Karlach, who I built as a Reverberation and Bleed Barbarian with a Tiger and Wolverine Beast Totems. She went 10 levels as a barbarian and then 2 levels as a fighter for action surge with no respecs necessary. Karlach single-handedly had the ability to apply multiple status effects to enemies, including the bosses. She could make them bleed, dazed, maimed, and even prone. And more importantly, because of her reverberation build, she could often strip bosses of their legendary resistance charges, which then made it possible to cast Hold Person and Hold Monster, even on bosses like Saravok and Gortash. The final member of my party was Lizelle. For the first part of the game, I just leveled her as a fighter and Battlemaster, taking advantage of her Battlemaster's special maneuvers like Menacing Attack and Trip Attack. These maneuvers are great not only because they can root or incapacitate an enemy, they also deal additional damage. Later in the game, I respect her to a Holy Warrior, 6 levels of Paladin, 4 levels of War Cleric, and 2 levels of Fighter. The War Cleric because it gave her the ability to turn 3 bonus actions into extra attacks, and it gave her access to Guided Strike, which as a reaction allowed her to use her Channel Divinity skill to add +10 to a missed attack roll. Couple those abilities with Great Weapon Master, the Fighter's Action Surge, and the Paladin's Smite abilities, and she made for a very strong offensive melee damage dealer. Not as strong as a monk, to be sure, but she also wasn't as reliant upon potions of Cloud Giant strength either, which were hard to come by in my playthrough because many of the vendors who usually carried them were empty of them even after long rests. As for the Paladin subclass, she started with Oath of Devotion for the bonus to hit, but quickly broke her pact and was thus an Oath Breaker for the remainder of the game. The only other companion who saw any battle time was Will. It is necessary to take him to the Illithid Mind Flayer colony in order to obtain the Infernal Rapier reward from Mizora, which, if you're running a bard like I was, you definitely want. The Infernal Rapier is great for bards because not only does it add that precious +1 to spell save DC, but it can also summon a Cambion. And having extra bodies in Tactician or Honor Mode is really nice. Before we dive into all these specific encounters, a few words about general strategies and playstyle. First, in the early game, I recommend waiting to tackle any of the bosses until you're level 5 and have extra attack on your melee characters. The extra attack makes a huge difference against the Owlbears and Phase Spider Matriarch, and there's absolutely no reason to rush these bosses and get yourself killed. With the Owlbears especially, if you want the help of Brenna and Andric, you can still recruit them later in Act 1 if you simply don't wander over to their part of the map outside the Druid Grove and trigger their scene. As long as you stay away from them, Edwin won't die, and Brenna and Andric won't leave, allowing you to recruit them whenever you like. Not that you need them for the Owlbear fight, because you don't, but it's nice to have some fodder there. Second thing, you can still use crowd control spells like Hold Person and Hold Monster on bosses with legendary resistance. You just first need to strip them of their resistance. Bosses get 3 charges of legendary resistance, and those charges are consumed whenever they fail a saving throw. For some bosses, the legendary resistance is constrained to a specific condition. For example, Saravok's legendary resistance will only trigger on a failed saving throw for any incapacitation condition. Now, normally there isn't enough time for the spellcasters on your team to waste 3 spellcasting attempts trying to strip the resistance from a boss. However, reverberation builds like the one I used on Karlach, especially when she's hasted, can quickly strip a boss of their resistances in a single turn, allowing your bard to hold them and your other team members to crit them down. That's why I love the Hold Person, Hold Monster spell so much. Every melee hit becomes a crit. Anyway, it's possible to use what I call normal game tactics to defeat the bosses. No cheese necessary. You just have to be aware of how their legendary resistance works. I'm sure there are other builds that can do the same thing as Karlach's reverberation build, and you should consider having one of those builds in your party just for occasions like that. Third point, have someone in your party with high charisma who can specialize in persuasion and deception. Bonus points if you have a bard for the additional bardic inspiration. There are a few fights you can actually talk your way out of if you have someone with high charisma and expertise in the conversational arts. Not to mention there are tons of other conversations in the game that benefit from you having a good leader. Fourth point, you're going to want to use potions liberally in the game, which means purchasing them frequently. It's a good idea to have a very concrete plan for the equipment you intend to use during the run. That way you can sell off the things you don't need and purchase potions and potion making components. At a minimum, you're going to want potions of healing, giant strength, oils of accuracy, and the most important potions, invisibility and elixir of vigilance. For certain bosses, the most important part of the fight is that you go first and burn them down as quickly as possible, preferably killing them on the first turn. And the only way to do this is with elixirs of vigilance to improve your initiative, or by being invisible and then attacking first, thus surprising them. Surprise is the best way, as it will give you a free first round where enemies will not attack, but sometimes the only way to make it work is with vigilance. Also, you're going to want to hang on to any potion of angelic slumber until the very end of the game. Players who are accustomed to normal difficulty may be surprised to find out that the nautiloid restoration chambers in the final walk up to the Netherbrain are destroyed in Tactician and Honor modes. This is intentional. So in order to recover expanded spell slots, the player will need potions of angelic slumber, which cause their characters to fall into a 2-turn sleep, which acts like a long rest. Fifth point, do not neglect scrolls. If, like me, you have some very melee-focused characters in your party, it doesn't mean they can't use scrolls. Gone are the old rules of D&D where a character needed points and use magic device and a dice roll to determine if they could use a scroll. Now, any character can use it, and you should. The only character you have to be careful with is the Barbarian, because they can't concentrate on a spell while raging. Still, there are situations in the game where extra AoE spells can really make a difference. In those cases, make use of your scrolls with your melee characters, so your magic-centric characters like sorcerers and bards can perform their normal roles. Sixth point, barrelmancy, as folks like to call it, is powerful in the first half of the game. You should take every opportunity to acquire as many explosive barrels as possible. Send anything you can't carry back to camp. Every time you do a long rest at camp, visit your storage and load up a few more barrels. Early game encounters like Priestess Gut and Dror Ragzlin can be made a whole lot easier with liberal application of barrels and a small flame. Remember, it's honor mode. Your objective is to win and get the golden dice. There are no style points. Victory is all that matters. Just be careful to keep flaming Karlach and torches away from standing barrels of smoke powder. This almost ended my run early. Finally, have an escape plan every time you go into battle. There's no shame in escaping, going back to camp and calling upon withers to res the dead. I had to do it with Answer because my first approach went poorly. With all that out of the way, let's get to the walkthrough. The first real trouble in the game, at least for me, starts in the Blighted Village with Fezzar. There's a lot of enemies at the windmill, and this fight can wipe out an ill-equipped low-level party really fast. I used my tadpole connections to cause them to flee, and then I made sure to recruit the ogres using the powers of persuasion to convince them to work for food because I didn't have any gold to hire them with. In the armory in the Blighted Village, off to the side through a cracked wall, I took out the 2 Ettercaps and 2 of the phase spiders. It's a good idea to drop down the well first in the Blighted Village and grab the spider step boots that allow a character to walk on the webs without getting stuck. Use that character to set up explosive barrels on the other side of the ravine, then have a character get stuck on the web intentionally, triggering the Ettercaps and 2 phase spiders to come running. Remove these 4 enemies, and this will make the phase spider matriarch easier to deal with later. From there, I made sure to take a shortcut out of Zevlor's chamber in the Druid Grove, and with the help of long jumps, recruited Karlach without having to fight any of the Gnolls on the other side. I wanted Karlach early because I wanted her to have the Absolute's brand on her character, so she could use the Ring of Absolute Force, which helps with her reverberation build. With Karlach in my party, I set off for the Shattered Sanctum. Roa Moonglow is a trader that you want to keep alive for later at Moonrise Towers because she has some really nice gear there. For now, buy anything you want from her and then have Lae'zel sneak up into the rafters. Cross over above Priestess Gut's room and drop down into the room with all the explosive barrels. This is where Roa keeps her loot, and if she sees a fight break out, she'll blow this room up. So I made sure to loot all the barrels, mainly because I was going to need them for fights. Have Lae'zel loot them and send them to camp, but keep a few on herself and Karlach for immediate use. Then she can use her Githyanki jumping skills and get out of there. After that, I headed back to Priestess Gut to get the absolute brand. I made sure to have Warlock Grease give the brand to everyone in the party, especially Karlach and Lae'zel, as it allowed them to use some nice melee gear early on. Afterward, we follow Priestess Gut into her room. You don't want to talk to her here. Instead, place a few barrels around her and set fire to them. You need to kill Priestess Gut first turn before she can call for help. Otherwise, if the fight spills out onto the other side of the door, Roa Moonglow will get involved and you'll be forced to kill her, thus losing out on all her loot at Moonrise Towers. With Priestess Gut dead, it's just a matter of killing everyone else in the Sanctum. Barrels can make these fights a lot easier in places, especially Minthara and Dror Ragzlin, who I killed instantly by stacking 5 barrels near him. However, in order to be able to stack those barrels there, I first had to pass a speech check while he was interrogating the dead mind flayer. So once again, having good speech and a bard for inspiration really helps. Also, don't get hot Karlach or torches too close to any of the flammable barrels behind the throne. This almost ended my run right here. With the inner part of the sanctum cleared, I exited my party through the torture chamber to the superior elevated position outside. I used the ogres for help here, but to do so, you have to make sure you're down on the ground, not up on the hillside. If you're on a flat, clear surface with a lot of room, the ogres will arrive. If you're not on a flat surface where they can run to you, such as on the hill, cut off by a ledge that requires jumping, then they won't come when you blow the horn. After clearing the Goblin fort, I convinced the ogres to fight for us again and deceived them into believing I'd pay them the next time. From here, it was off to fight the Gnolls, Paladins, and clear out the Zhentarim hideout. If you fight the Zhentarim, do so from the highest elevated position, so you can save all those explosive barrels below for later use. Loot the place out and call it a day. Around this time, you should be level 5 and our fighters should have extra attack. It's time to go kill some bosses. I ignored Edwin this whole time, so he was still there with Brenna and Andric. We recruited them to our cause and convinced them they needed to get revenge on the Owlbear. This is the first legendary enemy in the game. The Owlbear's mom's legendary ability is that she can now call her mate to the fight. He'll drop in from above, so it's a good idea to have Andric and Brenna with you to give him a target. Meanwhile, your own ranged folks should find the climbable wall and take position above. The Owlbears don't have any special resistances, so it's easy to use Karlach and Lae'zel to affect them with bleed, daze, maim, fear, and prone. In particular, frighten is really good. Lae'zel's menacing attack maneuver has a ranged version and can be used to keep Papa Owlbear in place. I, however, got lucky with a critical Eldritch Blast from my Great Old One Warlock, and that feared Papa Owlbear in place instead. Either way, fear is a great way to keep Papa separate, allowing you to kill Mama first. I managed to finish this fight with Brenna and Andric alive even. The Phase Spider Matriarch is really straightforward encounter. Her legendary ability, Gossamer Tomb, allows her to encase an enemy in a cocoon if that enemy attacks any of her children. Important note, the other 2 phase spiders in the room count as her children, not just the little ones that hatch from the eggs. So to be safe, attack no one but the matriarch until she's dead. The cocoon she can use can be destroyed with acid or fire, but you don't want to get caught in it in the first place, so the best thing to do is destroy her eggs before the fight even starts. This can easily be done with some acid arrows. There are only 3 clutches of eggs. Destroy those and then engage Mother. Good idea to buff for protection from poison beforehand. Once she's engaged, your team should take every opportunity to destroy any web that she's standing on. The best and most efficient way to damage her is to make her fall. You can't kick her into the void in honor mode anymore and have her end up down in the Underdark, but you can make her fall flat on her face and she'll take a bunch of damage doing it. I was able to drop her twice, and after that, it didn't take much to finish her off. Then deal with the final 2 children and it's game over. Auntie Ethel's legendary ability, Wild Magic Surge, allows her to create even more copies of herself than normal. Basically, anytime you cast a spell, she creates more duplicates. However, this ability can be nullified if Auntie is silenced. Now, remember what I said at the start of this video. Don't do these encounters too early. Auntie Ethel is a boss you don't even have to do unless you want her reward. The only other reason to go after her is for the XP. I waited until my characters were level 7 to do this fight, which was after I had already defeated True Soul, Nere, and Grym. That made things a lot easier. For starters, as you get higher in level, Auntie Ethel seems less inclined to try and cast Hold Person on your party, almost like she knows her odds of succeeding are lower. Instead, she opted for direct damage spells against my level 7 party. There are really 2 keys to this fight. First, Auntie's copies will always disappear if they take any damage, just like normal mode. But you don't really want to waste time attacking them, and you certainly don't want to try and clear them off with something like Magic Missile, because casting a spell will only induce more duplicates. Instead, you want to locate the real Auntie and bring her down to about 20 hit points. To do this, you need to be able to differentiate the fake Aunties from the real Auntie, and this is easy to do. The fake Aunties have green stripes on the backs of their skirts. The real Auntie has red stripes on the back of her skirt. Find the real Auntie and focus on her. Don't kill her though, just bring her down to about 20 hit points or a little less, and then get a reward. Bernard's legendary attack is called Leaping Static, and it basically works like Chain Lightning. He'll fire it at the first character who hits him each round, and it can branch to nearby enemies. In addition, he has the alert status, so he gains a +5 to initiative and can't be surprised. He also carries a pretty nasty glaive weapon for melee attack. I had been told that a Susser Flower anti-magic field would negate Bernard's Leaping Static, but as you can see here, that's not true at all. However, he can be disarmed with a Battle Master's maneuver, and that helped tremendously because from that point on, he only punched for 6 damage. The best way to deal with Bernard that I found is to buff with resistance to electricity first and then use Elixirs of Vigilance to give yourself a chance to act before him. I highly recommend disarming him and grabbing his weapon. I have no idea if he'll move to pick it back up, because the second he dropped it, I snagged it from him. The other thing I don't know for certain, but I suspect will work, is casting Darkness on him. If he operates like all the other bosses in Honor Mode, he can't hit what he can't see. His legendary action may not work if he can't target anyone. For my party, I just focused my melee characters on him after he was disarmed. Healing potions kept everyone alive, and my Warlock Sorcerer using lightning to take out the adds. Eventually, we kicked Bernard off the rooftop because amazingly, he's one of the few bosses you can still do this to in Honor Mode. Something that gives people trouble is the boat ride in the Underdark. This isn't a boss fight, but a lot of people's Honor Mode runs end here. They get wiped because the enemies will kick you off your own boat and send your party to a watery grave. However, we can make this fight much easier by using Hunger of Hadar and some arrows of Roaring Thunder. This will allow you to easily dispatch the majority of enemies from range and should keep your own party safe from harm. If you don't have a warlock with you who can cast Hunger of Hadar, you might want to reconsider, or at least get a lore bard with magical secrets at level 6, because there are several encounters in the game that are made much easier by using Hunger of Hadar. Before engaging True Soul Nere, it's a good idea to use your persuasion skills to convince Elder Brithvar that you're on his side, and you want to take out Nere for the Dwergers. This will give you some added fodder for the fight to come, and that's important because True Soul Nere's legendary ability, Psionic Visage, is a right pain in the ass. Psionic Visage works like this. Every turn, Nere gets 3 instances of Psionic Visage to use. When he's struck, one of those instances is converted to a spell that immediately retaliates against Nere's attacker with psychic damage. And it doesn't matter how far away the attacker is, the Psionic Visage will attack and it will reach them. This means that before you can really wail on Nere, you need to first get rid of his psychic visages. In other words, you need to get someone else or something else to do your dirty work for you. And remember, the 3 visages refresh every round. Thus, it really helps to have Elder Brithvar's Dwerger fighting on your side, but it also helps to summon Mage Hands. Mage Hands have really low initiative and will act last in every round, which is not ideal. Plus, they have really low chance to hit. However, they're completely immune to the psychic damage that Nere's spell performs, so it's possible to tag him with a hand and strip off one of his psychic visages. All that said, it's important to remember how Psychic Visage really works. It attacks the thing responsible for doing damage to Nere. So for instance, a barrel exploding will cause Psychic Visage to attack the attacker, which in this case is the barrel. Thus, the easiest way to get rid of Nere and his psychic visages is to lay barrels beside him and blow them up. But you don't want to try and place the barrels ahead of time because the Dwerger will just use them on each other. So the best thing to do is have melee characters like Karlach and Lae'zel get close to Nere, toss some barrels near him, then Misty step away and have someone shoot those barrels with arrows of fire. Had I figured out this strategy earlier, this fight would have finished quickly. Instead, I made a huge mistake. I summoned the ogres, thinking they'd attack Nere. Unfortunately, the ogres didn't share my affinity for the gnomes and immediately started attacking them instead, causing them to turn against me. I almost lost this fight because of those dunder-headed ogres. Fortunately, I figured out that once again, Barrelmancy works well in a lot of situations. If I had to do this fight over again, I think I would have positioned most of my team toward the entrance where you first walk in and kept the Dwerger between me and Nere. Then, with perfect timing, rush up, drop some barrels, Misty step away, nuke, and call it a day. Once Nere is out of the way, it's on to Grym. Grym's legendary action, Adamantine Reverberation, is very crafty. Like all legendary actions, it refreshes every turn. It adds 10 temporary hit points, and if these hit points expire, it causes a reverberation explosion that does thunder damage in a 4-meter radius around Grym and pushes targets back. It's possible to save against this damage and the resulting knockback, but I didn't have a lot of luck doing that. And although the damage range of the reverberation is 4 to 34, I mostly took the high end of the damage when it occurred. That said, Grym dies by all the old tricks. There are people who kill him at range and others who use the Owlbear trick. I'm not one for that kind of stuff, so I wanted to kill him straight up. I started by placing a bunch of stones and books at the center pillar, hoping to use Mage Hands to throw those objects at him. This would allow the Mage Hand to take the threat assessment debuff at the end of the turn and be Grym's primary target, but it would also hopefully lead him to the pillar where I could drop the hammer on him. Unfortunately, my plan never worked because the Mage Hands have such a low hit chance that I could never get them to strike the big fella. All in all, a failed strategy. Probably a good thing though, because using the hammer is what brings out the imps. Because I could never get it to work, I never had to deal with the added enemies. In the end, I did my best to simply hammer him down and heal my party members, knowing that I needed to position my melee attackers to account for the blowback and not fall into the lava. Thankfully, no one did, but Lae'zel still did die eventually. In hindsight, I think a slightly different strategy could have done wonders. Again, I think explosive barrels could have been useful here. Set them near Grym, blow them up from range to remove his 10 hit points and cause the shockwave, then close in with melee characters and pound him down with blunt weapons. After Grym, we made our way to the Githyanki creche, easily one of the most fun areas in the game. And once again, we set up barrels ahead of time to deal with the doctor and the friends she calls in for help after the Zathix situation goes bad. With the doctor and friends wiped out, we moved on to the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor has legendary resistance and the legendary ability Mindclaw of Tunereth. The Mindclaw ability can fire twice per round when the Inquisitor or his allies are struck. It doesn't matter how far away the attacker is, the Mindclaw will summon to the attacker. This causes a blade to be summoned, much like the cleric's spiritual weapon, only these blades do psychic damage instead of slashing damage. In addition, they can Mind Steal Link, granting the Inquisitor stronger attacks. Fortunately, much like the cleric's spiritual weapon, these blades are also pretty crappy at hitting anything, and it's fairly easy to avoid their wrath. The Inquisitor himself is a perfect test for Karlach's reverberation build. In fact, the gloves she needs for this build are in the container to the left as the party enters this room, but I was unable to steal them and didn't want to risk aggroing the room as it was honor mode. Ideally, you don't even want to allow the Inquisitor to start a conversation. This is one of those fights where you want to initiate first, or use Invis to get surprise. In my case, I set up my party, buffed with haste, weapon coatings, and strength elixirs, and then clicked on him with a melee attacker, rushed in, and started the encounter. I had Karlach go first and reverberate him. This maimed him, so even if he would have made it to round 2, he wasn't going anywhere. Her attacks stripped his legendary resistance, which could have allowed my bard, who had lower initiative, cast Hold Person later in the round. But that wasn't even necessary because the Inquisitor never lived past the first assault. Instead, with haste on her, Lae'zel came in behind Karlach's initial attack and simply crushed the Inquisitor with raw melee power and the smites of her god. Once the Inquisitor was down, the rest of the room went pretty easily. Focus on the spellcasters first and all should go smoothly. The next thing to take care of is Isabel. While this isn't a boss fight, it's an important one if you want to keep Isabel alive and keep the last light in as a safe harbor in the cursed Shadowlands. I tried stacking boxes against the doors to reduce the different ways the winged horrors could get into this room, but I didn't stack the boxes high enough. I only went 2 levels. 3, as it turns out, does the trick, so keep that in mind. I would advise boxing yourself into that room as much as possible so you don't have to fight as many winged horrors at once. If they capture Isabel, it's bad. With Isabel safe, it's time to move on to the Thorms of the cursed Shadowlands, Gerringoth, Thisobald, and Malus. This is where I don't have great data because I got rid of 2 of these bosses with dialogue checks. Gerringoth is probably the easiest one to kill, but just in case things go bad, leave all your gold somewhere before you approach. I left mine on the roof and grabbed it afterward. You want to do this because the more gold you have on your character, the harder she'll hit you in melee. Fortunately, we didn't have to melee her. Just make sure to use a strength potion on your strongest character, then invisibility, sneak up behind her when she passed to the ledge and boot her off. After that, take down the skulls. She'll remain trapped below, missing 80% of her health. After you mop up the skull, shoot a couple arrows down and finish her off. Don't forget to head down there and loot her corpse after. And don't forget to retrieve your gold pile either. With both Thisobald and Malus Thorm, I simply used the dialogue checks to defeat them. I wish I could have saved my game and fought them to figure out how to deal with their legendary actions, but such is life. I was trying to get through honor mode with as little risk as possible, and getting these 2 to kill themselves is a pretty easy way to get past them. When it comes to holding the portal open for Ragzlin so he can retrieve Thaniel, once again I advise Hunger of Hadar. It's ideally suited for this location. Most of the humanoid ads come from the eastern side of the portal, and they're easily slowed down and killed off with hunger. This frees your team to take down the shadows. Magic Missile is an easy way to remove the crows. The last legendary boss you'll have to deal with here is Oliver. He has the legendary action Vengeful Playmate. When one of his shadows dies, it envelopes a small area around it with a silent spell that does necrotic damage. Any character entering this sphere or caught in it at the start of their turn will take damage. Thus, you want to kill Oliver's summons from range. Wall of Fire is a great spell to use in this instance. Cast it right at the base of the steps and it will free up your party to focus range attacks on the shadows. Oliver will also summon a spectral owlbear, but it sounds far worse than it actually is. Just do your normal thing. Hit stuff from range and stay out of the resulting spheres. Each enemy you kill will reduce Oliver's shield. And just like normal mode, don't attack the shield directly because that will reflect the damage back twofold. Now we move to the Temple of Shar and Balthazar, and you definitely want to kill him when you meet him. He makes the entire Night Song encounter far more difficult, so it's better to kill him early. Balthazar has not 1 but 2 legendary actions, Spectral Aspect and the Dead Wastes. Spectral Aspect only triggers after Balthazar has been struck. It makes him resistant or immune to most damage, and it puts Bone Chill on anyone else who attacks him, meaning they can't heal for 2 turns. The Dead Wastes is a legendary action that Balthazar can use whenever a creature dies on the battlefield. It creates a miasma that heals all undead and does necrotic damage to everyone else. Between these 2 abilities, Balthazar is a right pain in the ass, but we can use that to our advantage. This was the one and only time in the game that I respect a character in a very minor way prior to the fight. I went back and made sure that my bard had Knock as a spell selection. Knock on Balthazar's door and open it up. He and his minions will eventually make their way out into the fray to fight the Justiciars. You want to leave everything alone and race for his room. Leave the Umbral Tremor globes alone. You want them to keep spawning enemies to fight Balthazar. Eventually, Balthazar will really get low on health. At that point, you want to take some shots at him or any of his minions he has left standing, so they will turn from yellow to red. You can only get XP from Balthazar if he's aggro at your party. I didn't do that, so I didn't get any of the XP. Once Balthazar is dead, set up Hunger of Hadar in the doorway along with any other AoE spells you want to use. Allow melee casters to chop up the remaining Justiciars as they filter through, and use any other direct damage spells you have. It's a long fight this way, but it's also a very safe way to kill Balthazar. And again, it's honor mode, so our goal here is to get to the finish line. There are no style points. Next is Yrgir. There are special dialogue options for warlocks and bards to get Yrgir to kill himself, and I've done that in prior tactician playthroughs. The problem is, in order to trigger the dialogue with Yrgir, you have to walk into his trap near his throne. If the conversation doesn't go your way, you'll be surrounded by his warriors. They will have superior position at elevation and will literally be like shooting fish in the barrel for them. So to ensure I came out on the winning end, I just snuck around the end and took up a flanking position. A little jumping is required to get there, but once you do, you'll have superior position for the entire fight. Hunger of Hadar works wonders here to keep Yrgir's warriors from swarming you. I recommend using Sanctuary and positioning concentrating spellcasters around the corner to keep them out of harm's way. Let the melee and archer characters in your group pick everyone off and move your Hunger of Hadar spell if you have to. Honestly, this probably would have gone a little faster if I'd had my melee characters cast area of effect spells from scrolls, but I wasn't quite that smart yet. I recommend you do all the Moonrise Towers stuff before rescuing the Night Song. Make sure to take Astarion there and get the +2 strength potion in exchange for a bite of his blood. And if you manage to keep Roa out of trouble back at the Shattered Sanctum, she'll be here with new gear, some of which you'll probably want to purchase. Get all of that taken care of, then free the Night Song, and then return for the big battle. The Moonrise Tower fight plays out the same way as regular or tactician mode. Hunger of Hadar and other AoE spells work great here. The only problem is keeping Jaheira alive. If you really want to prevent her from dying, the safest thing to do is take her into your party and respec her to a class combination you find useful for the fight. I should have turned her into a bard cleric like all my other party members and preserved her, but I didn't, and she kamikazed herself to death like normal. Thus ends the Minsk questline as well, because when you meet him in the sewers, your only option is to kill him. At this point, you need to fight Ketheric on the roof of the tower, and silly me, I didn't record that episode. It's a pretty straightforward fight. I suggest concentrating all firepower on his sorcerer friend, Susdera first, then focus on Ketheric. The fight ends when his hit points fall below 50% and he flees the scene. However, if you want to make the next fight with Ketheric easier, make sure to choose the redemption speech options. Pass those skill checks, and the fight with Merkel will bypass the first phase. After defeating Ketheric on the rooftop, I swapped Karlach out of the party and brought Warlock Paladin Will in. He's necessary for getting the Infernal Rapier as a reward for rescuing Mizora. I gave him the Charge-Bound Warhammer, which only works as an Eldritch Knight's bound weapon or a Warlock's packed blade. Will and Hunger of Hadar can make this next fight so much easier. For starters, you need to invis a couple of folks and send them over to Isabel. Ketheric/Merkel avatar can't be harmed while Isabel is restrained. You want to send your best DPS over to take care of the Mind Flayer too. Summon any elementals, cambions, or other minions you can. When the fight starts, Will should immediately cast Hunger of Hadar on the Necromites to the left. Hunger of Hadar has a very large sphere, so even as they are trying to descend down the webbing to the ground floor, they'll still be taking damage. This should kill most if not all of the Necromites that start the encounter after a couple of turns. Next, whoever is invisible beside Isabel needs to free her, and then your invisible main DPS, and for me this was Lizelle, needs to quickly take out the Mind Flayer. Otherwise, it will keep dominating Isabel. With the Mind Flayer gone, get rid of the Intellect Devourers and then move towards Merkel. Merkel's legendary action is Gaze of the Dead. It will use this action every round on the first person to attack it. This frightens the attacker, preventing them from moving, and does necrotic damage. In addition, just being near Merkel in melee range will put Bone Chill on characters, preventing them from healing for 2 turns. And the worst part is, Merkel will constantly incubate death, which will raise more Necromites, which can heal Merkel if they reach him. So it's a lot to deal with. Fortunately, Gaze of the Dead has to follow the rules of the Baldur's Gate universe, and an enemy, even a godly boss avatar, can't gaze at anyone if they can't see them. Thus, Darkness or Hunger of Hadar are huge here. With the initial wave of Necromites dead, I had Will recast Hunger of Hadar on Merkel and Mirror Image on himself. This allowed him to attack Merkel without getting Gaze of the Dead put on him, and it caused Merkel's melee attacks to miss him. Will shines in this fight with the Charge-Bound Warhammer. Along with smite spells from being a paladin, he did the bulk of the damage by himself. That left the rest of the team free to take out the incubating necromites and prevent Merkel from healing. A couple of rounds later, the avatar was dead. With Merkel dead, it's on to Act 3. At this point, we're level 10 and we need to make 2 more levels before we can take out the final bosses. There are tons of quests and fights one can do in the lower cities and the sewers, and I recommend you do as many as you need to get to level 12. For me, a lot of my time spent at level 10 and 11 revolved around acquiring gear, like the staff in Sorcerer's Sundries or the ghoul summons via the Necromancy of Theba. The only optional boss I went after was Answer, strictly because he had gear I wanted. And wouldn't you know it, he just about ended my run. There are a lot of problems to fighting Answer, and pun intended, I wish I had a clear answer for him. For one thing, lightning will constantly strike the battlefield, and since the battlefield is wet, it won't take long before everything is electrified, causing Answer's electrical breath weapon to do even more damage. His legendary action is called Draconic Wrath, and it allows him to use his electrical breath weapon on the first attacker that hits him every round. However, what I learned is that like all other enemies in the game, Answer has to follow the rules of the universe. He can't attack what he can't see. So once again, Darkness and Hunger of Hadar do wonders to prevent him from getting this attack off. Globe of Invulnerability is also very helpful here, but keep in mind it only lasts 3 turns and it's a very small space. If you intend to make it a core part of your defense, be able to cast it more than once. Answer will take to the air a few times, but he'll often land in the same spots. So I recommend that if you put down Darkness and or Hunger of Hadar, don't recast them to move them around. Keep them where they are. Just cast duplicates with other characters. Keep them where they are and he'll go back to those same locations going blind once more. Finally, Answer will take a turn to gather energy and launch a massive storm attack that appears to have no range limitations. I was unable to move away from this attack. I believe the only way to deal with this might be Globe of Invulnerability. What I can say is the Answer can be knocked out of the sky while this is happening. The Illithid power Mind Blast can actually stun Answer and drop him out of the sky. Range attackers are really ideal in this fight, and unfortunately I didn't have anyone spec'd for it. A Gloomstalker or other range burst damage dealer would do wonders, especially with some arrows of dragon slaying. As such, I had to kill his 2 elemental henchmen and then escape, go back to Withers, res my companions, and try again. During my second attempt at Answer, I used Darkness and Hunger of Hadar to negate his Draconic Wrath, and that, along with a bit of luck, allowed me to melee him down. All in all, my tactics for this fight were not great, but knowing what I know now, I'd make for more strategic use of Darkness, Hunger of Hadar, and Globe of Invulnerability, along with positioning and a burst ranged attacker. I think he'd go down pretty easy with the right setup. There's only one really tricky part of the Steel Watch, and that's the big battle inside the facility. I recommend going in sneaking or invisible, and quickly set up Globe of Invulnerability as the Steel Watcher arrives. Otherwise, you'll find yourself afflicted with magical fire like my party was, and that's not good. The only thing that really makes this fight tricky is that you can get a lot of ads from the facility itself, because it's a very big room and people can see what's going on. So be careful with AoE spells and try to only fight one group of enemies at a time. Once the Steel Watch is defeated, you can go free the gnomes at the Iron Throne. However, be warned. Normally, Omelium is easily rescued, but this time I found his door was closed and it was a DC 30 lock to open it. Karlach had no chance to crack it, so I had to retreat rather hastily so she wouldn't be left behind and die. So that's something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, I didn't capture any footage of that encounter, so I may have just missed a lever near the door. With the Steel Watch out of the way, it was time to take on Gortash. The best place to fight him is up in the bell tower, accessible by dropping down from the bridge and climbing up the backside of the keep. Fighting him in the bell tower gets him away from his devices and eliminates his personal shield. Take a character to the very top of the roof of the keep and then hit the lever to drop the ladder down. This will allow the rest of your team to move up to the tower, but it's also important because you want Gortash to be able to reach you. To pull him, you can position crates next to the railing to allow your characters to shoot over the railing. Before you move your party to the tower, however, have every single character, melee included, using scrolls of course, drop an AoE in the hallway. Hunger of Hadar once again works wonders to slow down enemies, and spells like Cloud Kill and Cloud of Daggers will go a long way toward either killing Gortash's henchmen or preventing them from pursuing you. Gortash, however, has no such hesitation and will run through the danger to reach you. He has legendary resistance, but as mentioned earlier in this video, it can be stripped. Once his resistance is gone, you can hold him, melee attacks become crits, and at that point, he dies. Sarevok has two legendary aspects. First, he has the legendary action Murderous Retort, which allows him to use Deathbringer Assault, which basically does a metric ton of damage in one stroke. However, he has to charge this ability first by performing 4 Murderous Strikes, so you have a little bit of time before this becomes a factor in the fight. Sarevok also has legendary resistance, specifically to incapacitation. For this fight, my Karlach Reverberation build was perfect. She was able to strip him of his resistance in a single turn. I kept inspecting him after every attack, and finally he was cleared of resistance charges. Meanwhile, I just kept his minions in the dark with Hunger of Hadar. Ideally, you don't want to kill them first because they'll buff Sarevok when they die, each with a different unique effect, but if you can strip Sarevok of his legendary resistance and then get Hold Person on him like I did, the crits will take him down fast. After that, mop up the ads and you're done. This fight worried me more than any of the others, and yet in the end, it was ideally suited to my builds and party composition, and it ended up not being so bad. Just like Sarevok, Orin in Slayer form has the legendary action Murderous Retort. Unlike Sarevok, she doesn't need to charge hers with 4 prior attacks. She can use it once per turn to do 7 piercing attacks in a single go. If she doesn't use the attack that round, she can apply a status to one of your party members that will cause them to instantly die the next round if they don't kill someone else on their turn. Because she's so deadly, you want to kill her as quickly as possible before the whole thing goes sideways. There's no getting around the conversation with her either that I could find, so there's no way to surprise her. Because of that, you want to make use of Elixirs of Vigilance, especially on your sorcerer or wizard. Someone needs to be able to upcast Magic Missile because Orin has 12 charges of Unstoppable, and those have to be removed before she'll take damage. Strip these away and she can be killed pretty quickly because unlike other bosses, she doesn't have a ton of hit points. Unfortunately, I was stupid and didn't use Elixirs of Vigilance on the rest of my party, only my sorcerer. So only my sorcerer was able to go before her. Orin jumped my party and did some healthy damage to a couple people. However, the one smart thing I did was attack her first with my Cambion. She tried to push him off the ledge. Joke's on her because he has wings. At that point, Karlach's Reverberation Bill shined once again. As you can see here, I was able to afflict Orin with bleeding, reverberation, maimed, and dazed, and eventually Lizelle made her go prone, which at that point, it's game over. Lizelle couldn't quite finish her off, and Orin was left with 5 hit points. However, the bleeding finished her when her turn started, so she never got to go again. The most important thing you need to know about the final battle is that there are no Nautiloid restoration chambers along the way, like there are in normal mode. This is why potions of angelic slumber are so important, and why you want to save them until this point in the game. There's one final vendor you can purchase potions from at this point, and I recommend emptying him of his supplies. Then it's on to the battle. I find the best approach is to sneak along the right-hand side of the entryway and start the battle up on top. There's a winged horror close by that you can take out before it calls for reinforcements, and then just use your best tactics to negate everyone else. Focus on the spellcasters and kill them quickly. If you can convince the fleeing guards to join you, all the better, because cannon fodder is never a bad idea. The first half of this ascent to the Elder Brain is my favorite part, and I love this extended battle against all the varied enemies. The second half of this ascent is complete ass, and I hate it. You'll be bombarded with magical artillery fire and fresh enemies every turn, and it just stinks. The smartest thing you can do is rush for the top and don't worry about stopping to fight anything, because once you enter through the final door, the encounter ends. To that end, a couple spells are really helpful. Dimension Door is great because you can use it in pairs. One person can cast it and move 2 people, and then the other person can cast it from a scroll if necessary and move the pair even further. Doing this, you can move a lot of characters really fast, rush toward the final door, and trigger the end of the battle. At this point, all that was left was the final Nether Brain. However, this was about finishing honor mode, so I simply convinced Gale to use his bomb to blow it up. There's no speech check necessary for this if you complete Gale's quest. Help him find the book he desires in Sorcerer's Sundries, and make sure he visits Mistress Statue in the Stormshire Tabernacle near the Basilisk Gate. Do that and he'll agree to sacrifice himself. And there you have it. The Elder Brain dies and you get your golden dice. Honor mode is complete. I have to say, I was hesitant to try this mode, and I was all but certain that I would fail. But then I remembered I actually got Kerensky twice in Battletech, and then made a guide that helped a lot of other people reach that achievement as well. So I figured I'd give it a shot. And wouldn't you know it, I got it on the first try. Sure, a Hot Flame almost ended my run early, and Answer almost ended it late. But those are great cautionary tales, and they're memories I'll never forget. Yes, there are far better players than me. A lot of them. Loads of players are soloing honor mode by taking advantage of every little edge the rules and game mechanics allow. And they're doing that all while smugly saying the game is still too easy. Well, good for them. But that's not me, and that's not my way. I wanted to do this with a full party, and I wanted to do it in a more or less normal fashion. The same way I got through Tactician mode. The same way I would do it if I were sitting down at a table with friends. Because the point was, if I can do it, then so can you. At the time I completed honor mode, less than 0.2% of players have gotten this achievement. I think the elite players often forget that the vast majority of gamers aren't like them. They don't think like them, and they don't naturally understand all the exploits it takes to play like them. I wanted to give everyone else, some of these players who I'm sure would like to complete honor mode, a blueprint for how to do it. It doesn't have to be the domain of the elite soloists. With the right party composition, honor mode can be completed. I wish you all good luck in your chase for honor mode. I know there are other tactics to defeating many of these bosses. My advice is use whatever works for you. The point is to get to the end and get the golden dice and pop the achievement. There are no style points. The only thing that matters is winning. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative in any way, give it a like. Consider subscribing to my channel, leave your questions and comments down below, and I can't wait to hear everybody's tactics and honor mode wins and losses in the comments below. I will see you next time. I'm Colors Fade, and until next time, happy gaming everyone.